It started as just another funny segment on The Tonight Show until Jimmy Fallon stopped laughing. The camera caught everything. The moment his smile faded, the way he set down his cards, the silence that fell over Studio 6B like a heavy curtain. What happened next wasn't comedy. It was something deeper, something that reminded everyone watching that behind every joke, every laugh, every perfect television moment, there are real people carrying stories too heavy for punchlines. The Tonight Show studios hummed with their usual electric energy that Tuesday evening. The iconic blue and gold set gleamed under the bright television lights. The Roots tuned their instruments in the corner, and the audience buzzed with anticipation. Jimmy Fallon, in his signature navy suit and perfectly styled hair, shuffled through his note cards with the easy confidence of someone who had mastered the art of making millions of people smile before bedtime. Tonight's guest lineup was typical for a weeknight show: a comedy actor promoting his new Netflix series, a pop singer with a chart-topping album, and what the production notes simply listed as heartwarming human interest segment. The third guest was supposed to be light, uplifting, the kind of feel-good story that would send viewers to bed with warm hearts and maybe a few happy tears. They had no idea what was about to unfold. David Chen had been a wedding photographer for 43 years. He'd captured love stories in every corner of America: beachside ceremonies in California, mountain weddings in Colorado, elegant ballrooms in Manhattan, backyard celebrations in small Midwestern towns. His hands had held cameras through thousands of first kisses as married couples, thousands of father-daughter dances, thousands of moments when two people promised forever to each other. But David's hands were different now. They trembled slightly as he sat in the green leather guest chair across from Jimmy's desk, not from nerves about being on television, but from something much more profound and terrifying. At 68, David Chen was losing his sight. Glaucoma, the doctors had explained, was slowly stealing the world he'd spent 4 decades capturing through a lens. "So, David," Jimmy began with his trademark enthusiasm, 43 years of wedding photography. You must have some incredible stories." David smiled, his weathered face crinkling around eyes that had seen more love than most people experience in several lifetimes. "Every wedding tells a story, Jimmy. Some make you laugh, some make you cry, but they all remind you why love matters." The audience responded warmly. This was exactly the kind of wholesome content they'd come to expect from Jimmy's show. But something in David's voice, a slight tremor that matched his hands, made Jimmy lean forward slightly. "What made you want to become a wedding photographer?" Jimmy asked, genuinely curious now rather than just following his prepared questions. David paused, and in that pause, something shifted in the studio's atmosphere. The bright television lights seemed to dim slightly, not literally but emotionally. When David spoke again, his voice carried a weight that reached every corner of the studio. "My wife," he said simply. "We got married 45 years ago, and our photographer was terrible. Blurry shots, wrong moments, missed the first kiss entirely. Margaret was heartbroken, so I bought a camera the next week and started practicing. I wanted other brides to have what she didn't get." Jimmy's smile softened. This wasn't the light banter he'd expected, but it was beautiful. "That's incredible. So you've been creating perfect moments for other couples ever since." "I've tried," David nodded. "But Jimmy, I have to tell you something. In 3 weeks, I'm photographing my last wedding. After that," he gestured vaguely to his eyes, "the doctors say I have maybe 6 months before the glaucoma takes the rest of my vision." The studio fell completely silent. Not the kind of silence that happens during commercial breaks, but the profound quiet that occurs when people realize they're witnessing something sacred. Jimmy's prepared note cards suddenly seemed irrelevant. "Your last wedding?" Jimmy repeated softly. "That must be—" "It's my daughter Sarah's wedding," David interrupted, his voice breaking slightly. "I've photographed thousands of weddings, but I never imagined I'd be shooting my own daughter's while losing my sight." Jimmy Fallon had hosted The Tonight Show for nearly a decade. He'd interviewed A-list celebrities, political figures, musical legends. He'd navigated controversial topics, handled unexpected moments, kept the energy high through technical difficulties and awkward silences. But sitting across from David Chen, he found himself in completely uncharted territory. "How are you preparing for that?" Jimmy asked, his voice stripped of any performance quality. This wasn't Jimmy Fallon the host anymore. This was Jimmy Fallon the father, the husband, the human being who understood what it meant to want to capture precious moments with the people you love. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital camera, worn from decades of use. "This has been with me for 15 years. It knows my hands better than I know them myself. I've been practicing shooting without looking through the viewfinder, learning to frame shots by instinct and sound." He demonstrated raising the camera and adjusting settings without looking at the display. "The camera becomes an extension of you after a while. But more importantly, I've realized that the best wedding photos aren't about perfect technical execution. They're about feeling the moment." Jimmy watched, mesmerized, as David's experienced hands moved across the camera with muscle memory. "What do you mean by feeling the moment?" "Close your eyes," David said suddenly. Jimmy blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry?" "Close your eyes for a moment. Trust me." The studio audience watched as Jimmy Fallon, live on national television, closed his eyes. David began to describe the scene around them. "There's a man in the third row wearing a red shirt. He's leaning forward because he's invested in our conversation. The woman next to him has her hand on her heart because she's feeling emotional. The cameraman to your left just wiped his eyes. Your band leader, Questlove, is nodding because he understands what it means to create art while facing limitations." Jimmy opened his eyes, and sure enough, every detail David had described was accurate. The audience was captivated, many of them unconsciously touching their hearts or wiping their eyes, just as David had observed. "How did you?" Jimmy started. 43 years of wedding photography teaches you to read people, to feel the emotional temperature of a room. I don't just capture images, Jimmy. I capture feelings, and feelings don't require perfect vision." The weight of what David was saying settled over the studio. This wasn't just about photography. This was about adaptation, about finding new ways to practice your craft when the old ways are no longer possible. It was about love persisting through limitation. "Your daughter," Jimmy said gently, "how does she feel about you photographing her wedding?" For the first time since the conversation began, David's composure cracked slightly. "She tried to hire someone else, said she didn't want me to worry about work on her special day. But I told her," he paused, collecting himself, "I told her that photographing her wedding isn't work. It's the most important thing I'll ever do." "Because it's your last?" "Because it's hers," David corrected. "Sarah has been coming to weddings with me since she was 5 years old. She's my assistant, my second shooter, my best critic. She knows photography because she learned it through watching love happen. This wedding isn't just about capturing her day, it's about passing the torch." Jimmy leaned back in his chair, processing the profound nature of what he was hearing. In the control room, the producer, who usually worried about time constraints and commercial breaks, had stopped watching the clock entirely. The cameras continued rolling, but this was no longer television in the traditional sense. This was storytelling at its most raw and human. "What will you do after the wedding?" Jimmy asked. David smiled, and for the first time since the interview began, it was a smile filled with joy rather than melancholy. "I'm going to teach. There's a community center in my neighborhood that offers photography classes for seniors. Most of them think they're too old to learn something new. I want to show them that creativity doesn't have an expiration date, even without your sight, especially without my sight. Some of the most beautiful photographs ever taken weren't about what the photographer could see. They were about what they could feel, what they could imagine, what they could help others see differently." Jimmy stood up from his desk, something he rarely did during interviews unless he was transitioning to a comedy bit. But this wasn't comedy. He walked around his desk and sat on the edge, directly facing David, abandoning the formal interview setup entirely. "David, can I ask you something personal?" Of course. Are you scared? The question hung in the air between them. It was the question everyone in the studio was thinking, but no one expected to be asked so directly. David considered it carefully before answering. I'm terrified, he admitted. Photography has been my language for 4 decades. It's how I communicate, how I connect with the world, how I show love. Losing my sight feels like losing my voice. But I've realized something these past few months. The love I've captured in all those photographs, it doesn't disappear when I can't see anymore. It lives in the couples who still have those images on their walls. It lives in the families who treasure those moments. And it lives in Sarah, who learned that love is worth documenting, worth celebrating, worth preserving forever. Jimmy found himself fighting back tears. This wasn't supposed to be emotional television. This was supposed to be light, entertaining, forgettable late-night content. Instead, he was sitting across from a man who was teaching him profound lessons about purpose, legacy, and finding meaning in the face of loss. Your daughter is lucky to have you as her photographer, Jimmy said. I'm lucky to have her as my subject, David replied. Do you know what the most beautiful wedding photograph is, Jimmy? Tell me. It's not the perfect posed shot. It's not the dramatic lighting or the expensive dress. The most beautiful wedding photograph is the one where you can see the love between two people so clearly that everyone who looks at it remembers what love feels like. David reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small photo album. These are some of my favorites from over the years. Not because they're technically perfect, but because they tell stories. He opened the album and handed it to Jimmy. The first photograph showed an elderly couple, probably in their 70s, dancing alone on what appeared to be a hospital floor. The woman was in a wedding dress, the man in a tuxedo, but he was connected to an IV pole. This was taken 5 years ago, David explained. Harold was in the hospital, terminal cancer. His wife Mary had waited 60 years to marry him. They never had the money for a wedding when they were young. So the nurses cleared out a room, Mary bought a dress from a thrift store, and they had their ceremony right there in the oncology ward. Jimmy stared at the photograph. Despite the unusual setting, despite the medical equipment, despite the circumstances, the love between Harold and Mary was so evident it seemed to radiate from the image. Harold died 3 days later, David continued, but Mary has this photograph, and every time she looks at it, she doesn't see the hospital room or the IV pole. She sees their wedding day. She sees love. Jimmy turned the page. The next photograph showed a young bride, probably early 20s, signing what appeared to be legal documents while still in her wedding dress. Adoption papers, David explained before Jimmy could ask. Jennifer and Mike had been foster parents to 8-year-old Tyler for 2 years. The adoption was finalized the morning of their wedding. Tyler insisted on signing the papers in his new suit right after the ceremony. He wanted to officially be their son on the same day they officially became husband and wife. Each photograph in the album told a similar story. Not just weddings, but love stories. Love overcoming obstacles. Love creating families. Love persisting through impossible circumstances. Jimmy realized that David Chen wasn't just a wedding photographer. He was a chronicler of the human heart. David, Jimmy said, closing the album carefully, you're not losing your ability to capture love. You're transitioning from capturing it with a camera to capturing it with your heart and sharing it with your words. David nodded, understanding what Jimmy meant. The tools change, but the purpose remains the same. Can I ask you to do something? Jimmy said suddenly. I know this might sound strange, but would you mind taking a photograph of our audience right now? Not for broadcast, just for yourself. David looked surprised. You want me to photograph your audience? I want you to show them what you mean about feeling a moment instead of just seeing it. David stood up, camera in hand. The studio fell silent as he raised it, not looking through the viewfinder, but scanning the audience with his ears and his instincts. He moved slightly to the left, adjusted his position, and then clicked the shutter. What did you capture? Jimmy asked. Hope. David said simply. "I captured an audience full of people who came here expecting to laugh, but instead found themselves feeling grateful for the love in their own lives. I captured the moment when a room full of strangers realized they were all connected by the same human experience." The audience began to applaud, but it wasn't the usual television applause. It was quieter, more thoughtful, the kind of recognition that happens when people witness something authentic and meaningful. Jimmy returned to his desk, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he remained standing, his hands resting on the back of his chair. "David, I want to thank you for coming here tonight, not just for the interview, but for reminding all of us what really matters. Your daughter's wedding is going to be beautiful, not because of perfect lighting or flawless composition, but because it will be photographed by someone who understands that love is the only thing worth capturing." Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you for letting me share these stories. Before you go, I have something for you. Jimmy reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small wrapped box. This is from everyone here at The Tonight Show. David unwrapped the box to find a vintage light meter, the kind photographers used before digital cameras had built-in metering systems. "It's from 1965, Jimmy explained, the year you were born according to our research. Light meters help photographers capture the perfect exposure even when they can't see clearly through the viewfinder. We thought you might like to have it for Sarah's wedding." David held the light meter in his trembling hands, and for the first time during the entire interview, he was speechless. The gesture was simple but profound, a recognition that his craft was valued, that his story mattered, that his legacy would continue. "I don't know what to say," David finally managed. "Say you'll remember that love doesn't need perfect vision to be captured perfectly," Jimmy replied. As David Chen walked off the Tonight Show stage that night, carrying his vintage light meter and surrounded by the warm applause of an audience that had shared in something extraordinary, the cameras captured one final moment. Jimmy Fallon, still standing behind his desk, watching until David disappeared backstage, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. The segment aired 3 days later and immediately became the most watched Tonight Show clip of the year. Not because it was funny, but because it was real. Because it reminded viewers that sometimes the most beautiful stories are found in the most unexpected places, told by people who understand that true artistry isn't about the tools you use, but about the love you put into using them. David Chen photographed his daughter's wedding 2 weeks later. The images were breathtaking, not because they were technically perfect, but because they were filled with a lifetime of love, captured by hands that knew instinctively how to find beauty even when the eyes could no longer see it clearly. And somewhere in those photographs, if you looked closely enough, you could see the wisdom that David had shared that night on The Tonight Show, that the most important things in life don't require perfect vision to be captured perfectly. They only require an open heart and the courage to keep creating, even when the world looks different than it used to. 3 months after the wedding, Jimmy received an unexpected package at his office. Inside was a small framed photograph. Sarah and her new husband dancing their first dance as a married couple. The image was stunning in its simplicity and emotion. But what made Jimmy pause wasn't the technical quality of the shot. It was the note attached. "Jimmy, thank you for helping me remember why I became a photographer. This image was taken completely by instinct and heart. I couldn't see the camera settings, but I could feel their love. That's what you taught me that night on your show. Sometimes we see most clearly when we stop trying so hard to see." David. Jimmy placed the photograph on his desk, where it remained for years to come. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by the pressures of television, by ratings and reviews and the constant demand to be entertaining, he would look at David's photograph and remember that the most meaningful moments happen when we connect with each other's humanity. The ripple effects of that Tonight Show interview continued long after the camera stopped rolling. David's story inspired other photographers facing similar challenges to continue their work. The community center photography classes he mentioned became so popular they had to expand to multiple locations. Sarah Chen Martinez, now a professional photographer herself, started a nonprofit providing free wedding photography for couples who couldn't afford it, carrying on her father's belief that every love story deserves to be captured. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Jimmy himself. That interview marked a turning point in how he approached his show. He began seeking out more stories like David's, understanding that his platform could be about more than just entertainment. It could be about connection, about sharing the extraordinary stories of ordinary people, about reminding viewers that behind every face is a human being with struggles and triumphs worth acknowledging. 6 months later, when David's vision was nearly gone, he received another call from The Tonight Show. Not for another interview, but because Jimmy wanted to personally thank him for changing how he understood his own purpose as a host. They spoke for over an hour, David sharing stories of his students at the community center, Jimmy talking about how that single interview had influenced dozens of subsequent shows. "You know what I learned from you, David?" Jimmy said during that call. "I learned that the best television happens when we stop trying to make television and start trying to make connections." David laughed, the same warm laugh that had charmed the studio audience months earlier. "That's the same thing I learned about photography 43 years ago. The best shots happen when you stop trying to take the perfect picture and start trying to capture the perfect moment." As their conversation ended, both men understood something profound, that sometimes a single encounter, a single honest conversation can change not just a moment, but a lifetime of moments that follow. David had come to The Tonight Show to share his story, but he had ended up teaching everyone who watched about resilience, about finding new ways to create when the old ways no longer work, about the difference between seeing and truly perceiving. The vintage light meter Jimmy had given David became one of his most treasured possessions. He carried it to every photography class he taught, using it not just as a tool, but as a symbol. "This," he would tell his students, holding up the small device, "represents the idea that there are always new ways to find the light, even when everything around you seems dark." Years later, when journalism studied the evolution of late-night television, many would point to that particular Tonight Show episode as a turning point. It represented a shift from pure entertainment to something deeper, a recognition that the most powerful stories are often the simplest ones, told by people who have learned to find extraordinary meaning in ordinary circumstances. David Chen never regained his sight, but he never stopped seeing. Through his teaching, through the photographers he inspired, through his daughter's continued work, his vision lived on in countless images captured by hands he had guided, hearts he had touched, minds he had opened to new possibilities. And Jimmy Fallon, who had spent his career making people laugh, learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help people cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition, of connection, of understanding that we are all more alike than different, all struggling with our own limitations, all searching for ways to create meaning and leave something beautiful behind. The Tonight Show studios continued to hum with their usual energy night after night, but something had changed in Studio 6B. In the guest chair where David had sat, future guests would find themselves encouraged to share not just their successes and projects, but their struggles and triumphs. The show became a place where vulnerability was welcomed, where authentic human connection mattered more than perfect sound bites. Because one Tuesday evening, a wedding photographer losing his sight had reminded everyone watching that the most beautiful images, the most meaningful stories, the most important connections happen not when we can see everything clearly, but when we have the courage to feel our way through the darkness and trust that love will light the path forward. The legacy of that conversation lives on in unexpected ways. Wedding photographers across the country began reaching out to David, sharing their own stories of overcoming physical limitations. A photographer in Seattle who had lost her hearing developed new techniques for reading body language and emotional cues. A photographer in Miami who used a wheelchair started specializing in accessibility-focused wedding venues. Each found inspiration in David's example of adaptation and perseverance. The Tonight Show received thousands of letters from viewers who had been moved by David's story. Many shared their own experiences of losing abilities they had relied on for their careers, their hobbies, their sense of identity. Teachers who could no longer see the blackboard clearly. Musicians dealing with hearing loss. Artists struggling with arthritis in their hands. Each had found hope in David's message that creativity doesn't depend on perfect physical ability. One letter particularly touched Jimmy's heart. It came from a 10-year-old girl named Emma, whose grandfather had been a painter before developing Parkinson's disease. "After watching your show," she wrote in careful handwriting, "I asked Grandpa to teach me to paint. He said his hands shake too much now. But I told him about the photographer man who said you paint with your heart, not just your hands. Now Grandpa teaches me every Saturday." His hands still shake, but his heart is steady. Jimmy kept that letter in his desk drawer, reading it whenever he needed a reminder of why authentic storytelling matters. It represented the true power of television, not just to entertain, but to connect people across distances and circumstances, to help them see new possibilities in their own lives. David's influence on The Tonight Show extended beyond that single episode. Jimmy began featuring more guests who had overcome significant challenges, not focusing on their limitations, but on their innovations and adaptations. The show became known for these moments of genuine human connection, where laughter and tears coexisted naturally. The vintage light meter remained a symbol of that transformative evening. Jimmy sometimes mentioned it in interviews, explaining how a simple gift had become a reminder that creativity requires tools, but more importantly, it requires vision that goes beyond what the eyes can see. David had taught him that the most valuable instruments for measuring life's beauty aren't technical devices, but open hearts and listening ears. As years passed, the story of the wedding photographer who taught a late-night host about true vision became part of television folklore. It represented a moment when entertainment industry polish gave way to raw human truth, when prepared questions were abandoned in favor of genuine curiosity, when the artificial boundaries between performer and audience dissolved into shared understanding. David Chen's final gift to the world wasn't just the thousands of wedding photographs that preserved countless love stories. It was the lesson that when we face our own limitations with grace and creativity, we give others permission to do the same. That Tuesday evening on The Tonight Show, he had photographed hope itself, capturing it not on film, but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed his quiet courage. And in Studio 6B, that blue and gold sanctuary where America comes to laugh before sleep, something permanent had changed. The conversations became deeper, the connections more authentic, the understanding that behind every guest, every audience member, every person watching at home, there exists a story worth telling, a struggle worth acknowledging, a triumph worth celebrating. Because sometimes the most important photographs are the ones that exist only in memory, developed in the darkroom of the human heart, where love provides the light that makes everything visible.